In the age of Vikings, when storms ruled the seas and gods watched from the clouds, the legend began to rise. They called him Ivar the Boneless, feared by many, underestimated by all, a mind sharper than any blade. But was he truly a genius, or just a saga's greatest exaggeration? The North Sea raged like a beast unchained. Waves towered like mountains, their white crests lit by flashes of lightning. Thunder rolled, carrying the voice of the gods across the dark horizon. In the flicker of stormfire, longships appeared, sleek silhouettes carved like serpents, sails stretched like wings of ravens. This was the Viking world, unforgiving, merciless, and alive with destiny. But our story does not begin with a ship slicing the sea. It begins in silence, in the shadowed halls of Ragnar Lothbrok, the most famous Viking king of his age. A prophecy hung over his family, as heavy as the smoke curling from their hearth. His wife, Aslog, had been warned by seers and wise men. Do not wed Ragnar in haste, and do not lay with him while dressed poorly, or a curse shall fall upon your son. Ragnar, proud and reckless, ignored the warning, and so the sagas say. When the child was born, his fate was sealed. The midwives gasped. The warriors who gathered around the fire stepped back. The infant's legs were twisted, his bones too weak to hold his weight. Some whispered he had no bones at all, only soft flesh like melted wax. Others swore his limbs bent like reeds, unnatural, cursed. In a world where strength was life, this was no ordinary child. It was a mark, a sign. Ragnar looked upon his son, and though disappointment flickered in his eyes, he named him Ivar Hinbane, Ivar the Boneless. The boy's childhood was a saga of cruelty. While his brothers, Ub, Sigurd, Vitsirk, and Bjorn Ironside, trained with swords and axes, Ivar dragged himself through the mud. His knees scraped raw on stones. His hands, his only means of movement, grew hard like leather. Laughter followed him, sharp as arrows. Some said he should have been cast into the sea. For what worth was a cripple in a world of warriors? Yet Aslog, his mother, shielded him. She whispered into his ear that the gods had chosen him for a path no blade could carve. Alone, Ivar's rage burned hotter than any forge. He wanted what others had, strength, freedom, glory. Nights passed where he stared into the roof beams, imagining himself not crawling but standing, axe raised high as men shouted his name. He wrestled with himself, fury against despair, weakness against will. And in those endless private battles, something unbreakable was born. If he could not master the sword, he would master the men who wielded it. If he could not walk into war, he would crawl into legend. His mind sharpened as his weapon. He learned to watch, to study, to calculate. Where his brothers saw only the swing of a sword, he saw the angle, the balance, the hesitation before the strike. Where others planned a raid with brute force, he studied fear itself, how it spread, how it crippled, how it could topple kings before the first spear was thrown. The sagas paint him as a genius child, already clever beyond his years. But history is less kind. English chronicles rarely mention his youth. Some historians believe his affliction was brittle bone disease. Others say he had a form of spinal disorder. And some think the sagas exaggerated his weakness to make his later victories more miraculous. Perhaps he was crippled. Perhaps he was only less strong than his brothers. What is certain is this. Ivar learned early that when your body betrays you, your mind must become your blade. One tale tells of Ivar asking to be taken on a hunt. His brothers mocked him, saying he would only slow them down. Yet he insisted. When the hunt began, he tracked not with legs but with patience, following signs in the earth, broken branches, the scatter of birds. It was Ivar who led them to the stag, Ivar who guided the kill. That day, his brothers saw not a cripple but a predator of another kind. Still, whispers followed him. Boneless. They sneered. A word meant as pity, as insult. But to Ivar it became a crown. For in the halls of warriors, what is more terrifying than a man who should be broken, yet is not? By the time he came of age, his mind was already sharper than steel. He had endured the laughter, the doubt, the endless torment of his own body. He had grown stronger in the only way left to him. And though the sagas blur the line between truth and myth, they agree on one thing. His enemies would learn to fear the boy who could not walk. And so the stage was set. A fragile child, crawling in the mud, would rise to command the fate of kingdoms. He would become a name that froze hearts, a terror that lingered in fireside whispers. The crippled boy would be carried not by legs of flesh, but by destiny. And destiny, in the Viking age, was always written in blood. The year was 865. The sea was black with sails. Hundreds of longships carved through the waves like a swarm of iron serpents. Their dragon prows gnashed at the sky as drums thundered across the horizon. Never before had England seen such a force. It was not a raid for silver, nor a skirmish for cattle. It was vengeance. Ragnar Lothbrok, once the scourge of kings, had been captured by the Northumbrian ruler Ella. His death was cruel and mocking, cast into a pit of venomous snakes, left to writhe as poison burned his veins. When word of this reached his sons, the earth itself seemed to tremble. They swore an oath of blood. Ragnar would be avenged. And at the center of this oath stood Ivar, the cripple who should have been forgotten, carried upon a shield, his body bound in leather. Ivar's presence was undeniable. Where his brothers spoke of fury, he spoke of strategy. Where they swore to storm Ella's walls, he counseled patience, deceit, and terror. He was no berserker foaming with rage. He was a chess master, moving pieces across a board drenched in blood. When the great heathen army landed upon English soil, the Saxons believed it was merely another raid. They had repelled Viking ships before, and they would do so again. But this was no band of pirates. This was an invasion. Towns fell like dry grass before fire. Villages emptied before the sound of the horn. The chronicles speak of pagans in countless numbers, a tide that seemed endless. And at the center of their victories was the mind of Ivar. The first great test came at York. King Ella, the same man who had killed Ragnar, marched to meet the invaders. He believed his army larger, stronger, ordained to win. The gates of York opened, and the Saxons surged forward, their swords gleaming, their shields locked tight. But what seemed like a Viking retreat was no retreat at all. It was a trap woven by Ivar's cunning. He lured them into the narrow streets of the city. The Saxons, pressed shoulder to shoulder, could not move their ranks. Panic spread as rooftops erupted with Viking arrows. From alleys, hidden warriors burst forth. The army that had marched with such confidence now collapsed in chaos, cut down where they stood. The slaughter was merciless. And when Ella was captured, Ivar ensured his death matched the cruelty given to Ragnar. The sagas tell us he was executed by the blood eagle, ribs cracked open, lungs pulled to the sky as an offering to the gods. Historians doubt this, suspecting the tale was crafted to terrify enemies. Yet the truth hardly matters. What mattered was the message. Ragnar had been avenged, and Ivar's wrath had no limits. From that moment, his legend grew. He was not just a leader. He was fear itself. Villages surrendered at the mere rumor of his approach. Kings trembled at his name. Mothers frightened their children into obedience by whispering, "The Boneless is coming." But no warlord reigns alone. By his side stood Ub, his brother, loyal, fierce, a man of sword and shield where Ivar was of mind and tongue. Together, they were opposites that became balance. Yet even between brothers, mistrust lingered. Ivar's temper was a storm, his pride a double-edged sword. Still, again and again, Ub stood with him, proof that alliances in blood are forged not of love but of survival. The sagas describe Ivar as cruel beyond measure. He used prisoners as pawns, executions as theater. In one tale, he dragged captives behind his chariot, letting their bodies break upon the stones. Was this history, or myth to magnify his terror? The chronicles offer fragments, hints of atrocities, but not the vivid horrors the sagas sing. Perhaps the truth was less gruesome. Or perhaps even the chroniclers dared not write what they saw. What cannot be denied is that Ivar understood the battlefield like no other. He mastered not only tactics of war, but tactics of the mind. He spread rumors, created panic, and let fear fight for him long before steel met steel. When enemies prepared for his attack, they often broke before his warriors ever struck. He knew that terror was a weapon sharper than any blade. Yet even as victories piled, so too did shadows. Some whispered that the gods had cursed him not just in body, but in spirit. His cruelty alienated allies. His arrogance made even his brothers wary. Still, for years, his genius carried the Vikings to triumph after triumph. And so England bled. Fields burned, churches crumbled, kings knelt or fled. The great heathen army carved itself into history with fire and iron, and at its heart sat a man who could not stand. A man whose mind was his chariot, whose fury was his weapon. But genius is a fragile crown. With each victory, pride grew. With each conquest, enemies learned. The Saxons began to adapt, to study the very man who studied them. The web Ivar wove so carefully would one day unravel. For though his mind was sharp, his body was brittle, and time waits for no warlord. The sagas tell us he was invincible, that no foe could match him. But even legends must face truth, and truth is cruel. The fires of conquest cannot burn forever. Even the fiercest storm must break. Even the greatest warlord must fall. For Ivar the Boneless, whose mind had carved empires, the end did not come with a roar of triumph, but with the slow, creeping shadow of decline. Years had passed since York. The great heathen army, once a tide of iron that drowned kingdoms, began to fracture. Brothers who had stood shoulder to shoulder against Arella now quarreled among themselves. Ambition split them. Greed scattered them. Some returned to Denmark. Others carved their own fiefdoms in foreign lands. And Ivar, once the mind that united them, felt his grip begin to loosen. His body, never strong, grew weaker with time. Pain gnawed at his limbs. Every movement was a reminder of fragility. Every breath a war against betrayal from within. But still, he would not surrender. The sagas say he laughed at his own suffering, mocking the very gods who had cursed him. Yet one wonders if in the stillness of night, when no eyes were upon him, he raged not at the world but at himself. He pushed on, launching campaigns in Ireland and England, seeking to cement his name in blood and terror. Some accounts claim he captured Dublin, ruling as a king for a time. Others insist he raided deep into English soil, his presence still as feared as ever. But the cracks were showing. The same cruelty that had once inspired fear now sowed resentment. Allies began to doubt. Warriors whispered behind his back. The army that once followed him out of loyalty and terror alike began to wonder. Had the Boneless lost his touch? The sagas give us visions of his final days, grand, larger than life. One tale says that when his bones finally shattered beneath him, he demanded his men lay him upon the battlefield, so that even crawling, he would face his enemies. Another says he laughed at death, a mocking grin upon his face, daring the gods to strike him down. But the chronicles of the Saxons tell a different story. They speak of a warlord weakened, his campaigns failing, his enemies emboldened. They record a man cornered, outnumbered, stripped of the invincibility his legend had given him. How did he die? No one can say with certainty. One story claims he was cut down in battle, his body finally betraying him. Another that he died quietly, perhaps of disease, his frail frame no longer able to endure. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle notes his death without grandeur, almost casually, as if the terror that once shook kingdoms had dwindled to a whisper. Yet even in death, the myth refused to die. Centuries later, in the fields near Repton where the great heathen army had camped, archaeologists uncovered a grave unlike any other. The skeleton was large, unnaturally so, and surrounded by weapons and offerings. Some believed it to be Ivar's final resting place. Others dismissed it, pointing to inconsistencies. Still, the discovery ignited whispers. Could this truly have been the Boneless? Had his body been larger than legend claimed? Or was it yet another trick of saga exaggeration, where stories grow taller than truth? What matters is not how he died, but how he was remembered. To the Saxons, he was a monster, a crippled demon who mocked God and brought fire upon holy ground. To the Vikings, he was a genius tactician, proof that the mind could wield power greater than muscle. To storytellers, he was both, truth and myth stitched together like the threads of a tapestry. And in that blending, he achieved immortality. Consider this. Had he been only a cripple, history would have forgotten him. Had he been only a warlord, he would have been one among many. But by being both, the fragile boy who became a terror, the cursed child who defied fate, he became legend. And legends live longer than flesh. The end of his saga is bittersweet. His victories faded, his empire dissolved, his bones, if indeed they were bones, crumbled to dust. Yet his name endures. In firelit halls, skalds sang of him as a symbol of cunning. In modern tales, he is remembered as both villain and hero, genius and madman. His true story lies buried somewhere between those extremes, in the space where myth and history collide. Was he truly a master tactician, orchestrating victories with brilliance? Or were his deeds inflated, his legend crafted by sagas eager to glorify Viking wrath? Perhaps both are true. Perhaps his greatest triumph was not in battlefields won, but in memory claimed. For when men speak of the Viking age, they speak of Ivar. And when they speak of Ivar, they do not ask what he conquered. They ask whether he was real. And so, as the saga closes, picture him one last time. The boy crawling through mud, mocked by brothers, eyes burning with fury. Picture him carried on a shield, his voice commanding armies greater than kings. Picture him in his final moments, laughing at death, daring even the gods to deny him glory. Was it truth? Was it exaggeration? Does it matter? For in the end, Ivar the Boneless achieved what few mortals ever can. He became a story stronger than bone, a story that time itself cannot break. So now I turn to you. Was Ivar the Boneless a cripple who rose to genius, a mind unmatched in an age of warriors? Or was he a saga's exaggeration, a phantom larger than life, stitched together by fear and firelight? The answer lies not in the chronicles, nor in the sagas, but in the telling. And this telling has now reached its end. But the sagas never rest. Another story waits, another legend ready to rise from the mists of history. If you have felt the clash of myth and truth tonight, then join us again. Like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more tales where legends walk the line between reality and imagination. For the gods are listening, and the next saga awaits.